Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, Beyond Ex Corde, Pope Francis's Hope for Catholic Universities. I'm Jack DeGioia. I'm the president of Georgetown University here in Washington, D.C., and I'm so honored to be joined for this session by Father Friedrich Bechina, the highest-ranking English-speaking official in the Vatican's Congregation for Catholic Education. Father Bechina currently serves in the position of Undersecretary to that body. And he has worked closely with ACCU for nearly a decade in increasing understanding and fostering a collaborative relationship between the congregation and Catholic higher education. At Father Bechina's request, our session will be conversational with a focus on the purposes of Catholic higher education and how our understanding has grown in the years since Ex Corde Ecclesiae. And there will also be time towards the end of our session for Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A field throughout the presentation. So let's begin. I'm going to begin by posting a question to Father Bechina, and that is the following. Father, after the Second Vatican Council, the Universal Church and the Roman Curia worked hard to put into practice the renewal which the council wanted to bring forward. When you reflect on what you have come to know about the first preparatory work for the later apostolic constitution, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, would you say that the document published in 1990 fulfilled the mandate of the council and the task to bring about the necessary reform and renewal with regard to Catholic universities? Let me turn to you.
Yeah, thank you, President DeGioia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's for me. To everybody, I had some years ago the chance to assist the ACCU meeting in Washington, and I'm used to go to the Rome seminar of ACCU every year, which this year we couldn't have. But I'm happy that we can be now connected in this moment with all the presidents and other leadership of the Catholic universities in the United States. Thank you so much for inviting me. And coming to your question, I would say, yes, the document fulfills this purpose. But if I'm looking self-critically to myself, that with what we have done, then I say probably we, in putting it into practice, have not always fulfilled the purpose. And that brings me back, what was the purpose of this document? And I would say it was kind of a new style document. Jack mentioned the reforms of the Vatican Council. And universities is a special field because actually universities are based on the fundamental academic values, which by the way came from the heart of the church, as the Ex Corde says. So this is the institutional autonomy of universities as well as academic freedom. But the church in her history had not always an easy time with these values. So at the time after the Second Vatican Council, when it became clear that we should have a document also on Catholic universities, it was clear that this cannot be done just like all the other documents, that you empower somebody, ask somebody to write a document, and then some cardinals in Rome would examine it. So the process started, and probably you know it started, we can say, in the United States, in a regional meeting of the Catholic Universities Association, famous Land O'Lake, place where we know, some of you would probably know the statement Land of Lake, which was actually the kickoff of the work of the Ex Corde Ecclesia, which was then strongly influenced by Paul VI and John Paul II. And there was a number of consultations, 3 big congresses, and basically all the Catholic universities at that time had been invited to comment. And then the document was made out of this. So it was a long way. But the document was then a great progress. And I would say that probably a lot of things which we find in the document, if we just read the text, very up to date, I would say. And also the big topics of today's pontificates, the care for the creation, the interdisciplinary research, this kind of openness, the working together also with non-Catholic institutions, engaging with sciences, with all this you find in the document. But again, I think we still had not fully been empowered. We have not fully been aware how to deal with this kind of documents. I give you an example. When the document was written, and it avoids the idea of control, of imposing something from above. But at that time, the Apostolic Constitution that ruled our own dicastery's tasks said the task of the dicastery is to control all higher education institutions which are honored to call themselves Catholic. So this is something. And then a second element which I would mention as a kind of a problem of that time is that we too much tried to define the link between Catholic universities and the church by juridical or material elements, and didn't come probably to the essence as well. And I've gone to our archives and I looked all the history, and I could talk about this much longer, but I don't want to bother you. But the interesting thing for me now of this session is Jack DeGioia at the time when the work began was rather young, but in the most important phase of the document, which was between 1980 and 1990, was first a student and then becoming already a university leader at Georgetown University. So I guess Jack would know those things which I don't find in our archives. So what did the students feel? What was the situation at that time? And I mentioned an additional last element. You know that Cardinal Baum was the one who brought Corde to its form as it was when he was prefect of our congregation from 1980 to 1990. But before becoming prefect of the congregation, and this is probably the reason why he was the bishop of Jack DeGioia in Washington. So you probably also, from knowing Cardinal Baum from that time, you can imagine and fill the gaps. Tell me what I don't know about this.
Oh, well, I'll offer just a few words of what it was like being here. For those in our audience who may not be familiar, I've been at Georgetown since I was a first-year student as an undergraduate in 1975. And then in the early 1980s began a series of roles here at the university. And in 2001, I began service in my current role. It's in that context that I've been able to work so closely with you. But you're quite right. There's an arc here, and I guess I could put it in perspective and maybe connect, as you did just a moment ago, the bookends of the Land O'Lakes statement and Ex Corde Ecclesiae. 1967 for Land O'Lakes, 1990 for Ex Corde. And let me just comment what it was like for me, first as a student, then as a young member of the administration, and then as I took on additional responsibility, because when it came time to implement Ex Corde, I was in this role in 2001. But what I do appreciate is you placing the path of Ex Corde from the Second Vatican Council and the need to respond to the call for renewal. And I think describing this as a culmination of really a 25-year effort is also very helpful in the American context. So let me put this in the American context, beginning with, as you did with the Land O'Lakes conference and statement. And again, for those who might not be familiar, this conference took place in 1967. It was hosted by the then president of Notre Dame, Father Theodore Hesburgh. Notre Dame has a retreat center in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin. And this conference in 1967 produced a statement signed by 26 participants, the sort of leaders in Catholic higher education at the time. And two of those signatures were the president and provost of Georgetown. And what I'd like to do, I have it right here in front of me. What I'd like to do is just read to you, the first sentences of that document, because I think it captures the essence both of what you've described just a moment ago, Father Bechina, in terms of the key elements of what we were trying to capture in the course of this effort of renewal, but what was really presented in the Land O'Lakes statement. And it reads like this. These are just the first sentences. The Catholic University today must be a university in the full modern sense of the word, with a strong commitment to and concern for academic excellence. To perform its teaching and research functions effectively, the Catholic University must have a true autonomy and academic freedom in the face of authority of whatever kind, lay or clerical, external to the academic community itself. To say this is simply to assert that institutional autonomy and academic freedom are essential conditions of life and growth, and indeed of survival for Catholic universities, as for all universities. And to remember the context, this was a moment where Catholic universities were trying to wrestle with the implications of coming into the dialogue with modernity, and to respond to the criticism and challenge of many that we weren't on par with the leading universities in the nation. So this element was very, very influential in the context of the time, just as you shared. Now, a second element for me at Georgetown was what was unfolding in response within the Jesuit order. And this was embodied in the person of Father Pedro Arrupe. And Father Arrupe challenged Jesuit institutions and those working within them to ask whether we were equal to the demands of justice in the world. And I arrived, as I said a moment ago, in 1975, and throughout my years, we were wrestling with this tension between the intellectual apostolate and the commitment to academic excellence and the commitment to justice. Academic excellence and justice. And then the third movement in the arc in my years here was Ex Corde. And it's so helpful for you to put it in that context that you did just a moment ago. I think here in the US, it was experienced as, I don't know whether this will translate as well as I would like it to, but it was in a different register. It was sort of a different style of communication. And so it took us a decade of conversation in the 90s to try to come to terms with what was this asking of us. And the insights that you offered a moment ago, I don't know that we had the interpretive framework to see them as clearly in the 1990s. You mentioned Cardinal Baum. He was Archbishop here in Washington when I arrived as a student. I didn't actually get to know him though until my first visit to Rome in this role. I went to see him when I visited in 2002 as president of Georgetown. But I worked successively with his successors, Cardinals Hickey and then McCarrick, Cardinal Wuerl, and now Cardinal Gregory. And in these contexts, we've wrestled with the implications of implementation. And as you and I have discussed on so many occasions, there are remaining challenges that we need to engage. And let me just pose a couple. I think one is we need to continue to deepen the harmony between autonomy and excellence on the one hand, which really is this emphasis that emerged out of the American context, and then the commitment to communion that's so carefully articulated in Ex Corde. And a second continuing challenge, I mentioned Father Arrupe. Well, we see this now, as you just shared a moment ago, in documents like Laudato Si, which is this question of how do universities contribute to the construction of a culture where we accept our responsibilities to one another and for future generations and for our common home. And then perhaps the third continuing challenge is how do we ensure we draw upon the incomparable resources of our Catholic tradition and animating our missions as colleges and universities, including the contributions of Pope Francis, Evangelium Gaudium, Laudato Si, Veritatis Gaudium. I think these are all challenges that I know we've discussed over the years on different occasions. I'd be grateful for your perspective on how should we engage these challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Jack, also for this beautiful picture of how you experienced the development of Corde and the time of universities in the last 50 years. What struck me when you mentioned the first sentences of Landon Lake, that a Catholic university is first of all a university and has to strive for excellence. This is a word which is nearly literally taken into Corde, and you find it like a refrain coming back and back. It always says a Catholic university like any university, or a Catholic university is a university which strives for excellence also, and then it comes to the Catholic identity. So I think this is something that has been taken over. But there I say, you mentioned in your question, how can we deepen harmony? And I doubt if we can always deepen harmony, because I think that's also part of the university. We need also the challenge of tensions. And I think often the tensions are fruitful, and you in the university will always have a tension between the three missions. I know we have this, especially also here in Europe, but we have it everywhere. Again and again, the discussion, how many resources do you put into teaching? How many resources do you put into research? And now, and every more, it is the question, and is the third mission just something which is additional, or is it part of the essence of the university? And I think, and this goes already in the other two questions, because the real good universities are those who can balance all these three things. There is not a one size fits all, and I know there's brilliant teaching institutions. If they would now invest their money into most of their money in research, I think they wouldn't anymore fulfill their purpose. It's like the question, what is the best car? And then you can say a Ferrari, but then I say, have you ever tried to go with your family with 5 kids on holiday with a Ferrari car? Or if you drive in Rome, then you would say, okay, it's a family van. But if you say, okay, then let's try to drive around in Rome and find a parking space for a family van. So the best university is the university that serves best its purpose. And this brings me to an important point, I think, which we can still deepen. There is not one size fits all. What is the best Catholic university? I think every Catholic university is then the best if it follows its inspiration, if it follows its vision, it follows its mission, and then we will have as many as Catholic universities, as many expressions of legitimate expression, what is Catholic. But I think at least the question must be for us present, how to balance these three areas, teaching, research, and the third mission. And I think there the Catholic identity can be a help, so that the Catholic university in the end is not just a university like the others that strives also for excellence, but by being Catholic, I think we have a possibility to find a better balance of these three areas. So I would now say, after these years in which also our Catholic universities have undergone an enormous development, because I know that we did not have, with some exceptions, a greater number of Catholic universities which would range among the best ones. In some countries, yes, in others not. And I think there the Catholic universities, especially in our time, and with values with which they can provide better than others, have gone up also in the public esteem. And therefore I would say it is something, if we focus on a real understanding and a good understanding of Catholic identity, this will help us to be also excellence. But excellent does not mean that we have the most research money, doesn't mean that we have the most Nobel Prize winners in our staff, but it means that we fulfill the purpose, including the third mission. So this would be probably the first. Probably you can just briefly repeat the second one.
Well,
short words.
Yeah. Well, again, one of the overarching themes that connects both the second challenge and the third is how we draw from the resources that have emerged. I think you're quite right in identifying now, when we look at Ex Corde now, I think we see it differently and in a way that is enriching, in a way that we didn't 30 years ago when it was first presented. I think those tensions that you identified earlier at the heart of the church and at the intersection with universities were relevant to some of the tension we had very early on 30 years ago. But as we moved through the 90s, as we implemented the document, I think we've come to a place where it's been very dynamic and very inspirational to us. But it's also been complemented by other documents that have emerged over these years with St. John Paul II, Fides et Ratio, with Pope Benedict, his speech here in Washington, where when he did his visit as Holy Father and offered the perspective of what he called intellectual charity as part of the framing of our work. And now we have a series of speeches and presentations and letters of Pope Francis. And we could look at the letters, we could look at perhaps overarching themes. Let me suggest three quick themes that I'd be interested in whether this resonates with you. I think with just building from my earlier comments, I think there might be three characteristics of Pope Francis's leadership that we might want to think about. The first is, and these are specific to what I think we in universities might pay attention to. The first is his commitment to a culture of encounter, that we must be places of encounter. The second is, as he has tried to demonstrate, a synodal church. The synods, I think it was Austin Ivory who described the approach to synods as an inverted pyramid, the opposite of what Austin describes as the imperial model. Well, this style of encounter and synodality, this has a profound resonance with the culture and style of colleges and universities. And then, of course, we have the various, the kind of challenges he poses to us in documents like Laudato Si. How do we understand our responsibilities to care for one another, to care for each other and for our common home? I'd be interested in where you think the resources that are now available to us complement Ex Corde, and how the leadership of the Holy Father contributes to our understanding of the role of Catholic colleges and universities today.
No, I would say the greatest resource which we have there is exactly the universities and the colleges. And we need them to get what you have outlined now, to get it into practice, to get it into the world. We need universities in both, as the Vatican Council made the distinction between the church ad intra and the church ad extra, which means the church has always a focus on serving to the world, but it is also the question of the church itself. And I think there is an enormous potential, but also a great responsibility of Catholic universities, because in a certain sense, you are one of the strongest instruments, and this is also part of Ex Corde, which has also sometimes been misinterpreted. But Catholic universities is one of the most powerful instruments for the church. And I think bringing it to these topics, we see I think a homily is nice, and the document, the papal document is nice, but you are dealing with the future leaders, and you are not just teaching future leaders, but they can experience on your campus a different way of life, a different way of being open for the other one, also in the otherness of the other one, to be able to live in kind of a unit of the unity of a university, which takes the word unity serious.
Sure.
So this is what you can do for the world, and therefore Catholic universities should never have been just the Catholic closed and protected environment. Catholic universities are open to all students, but they should feel that there is something different that makes them even better for their purpose. So this is what I would say for the external, the mission, that you promote these topics and promote it on 360 grades. So that means you are the ones who create knowledge. You are the ones who can go into research. You are the ones who even can say, okay, it's a bit too simplistic how it is said in a document, but let's take the idea, what is behind, and let's go deeper. Let's use our research. Let's use the best brains which we have to develop this, just to give some examples. But I would add immediately that I see also a critical function within the church. And this has to do with your question before, where you mentioned always the tension between social engagement and intellectual excellence. And I think it was a time of crisis when in the church, many religious orders thought they could give up the best high schools they had. They say, oh, they are for elites, but we have to care for the poor. And we give up a university and go and do field work. But then they found out that by these decisions, they couldn't really help the poor because they lost the influence to change. And therefore, I think that it's the role of the university to remind the church that it is not just building a lofty communion in emotional communion. It is not just to do something for protecting the environment, but we have to do it also in trying to do it intellectually at a high level. And we have to try to create an atmosphere where future leaders can grow into their leadership.
I think your insights here are very, very important, because one of the challenges that we're experiencing right now as we wrestle with the pandemic, what has emerged so clearly are the growing inequities, the growing inequalities. And there is an immediate need to address the impact of those inequalities, issues related to justice. But there's another dynamic, and it's one that I think universities are uniquely prepared to address, consistent with your comments, which is one of the challenges of this moment is trying to understand the structural nature of these inequalities, the institutional injustices, the institutional. In the United States context, we're especially wrestling with the question of structural or institutional racism that comes out of the history of this country. Universities, where we have the kind of strengths of academic disciplines that can dig very deeply into these questions, it's hard to imagine how we would address structural questions without the resources that our universities bring. I'd be interested in your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think it's a great example, the present crisis, also the COVID crisis. Because in addition to what you have said, I see also that people tend to have very simplistic solutions. And that means they make it difficult to look at the real problems that are behind. I understand, and we struggled also at the congregation a lot to help our schools and universities to develop schemes of digital education and to get fixed some principles that teachers who were not prepared for doing this got into the business. But this is just one thing, and I think that's the great possibility of a university, is to say, okay, let's pause a moment. Let's go back and ask the deeper questions, or do a research on this. And there is different problems. One is to be very simplistic, but the other one is to become ideologic. So you see also in the responses to COVID, we are very separated, and it becomes kind of a religious war between those who say COVID is a crisis and those who say it's not a crisis, and those who say you have to vaccinate people, and those who say you cannot vaccinate people. And the strange thing is that this becomes a religious discussion, not because people are referring to religion in discussing these issues, but they make out the issue their religion. And I think there is the strength of the Catholic University. Strangely enough, I think we are better protected against ideology, because we always have to deal with this tension, and we have to deal with this tension for 800 and 900 years or even longer in the church. So we have already some experience. And that means, I think the Catholic University can do excellent research in these moments, excellent education, can do something in the third mission. But at the same time, the real Catholic identity and the humility to know that we are not wiser and more intelligent than God himself, but that we are serving and we are creatures created by him, and all what makes up the Catholic identity. I think this is then a help for the Catholic University to do, on the one hand, the very critical thinking with regards to today's question, but also do not immediately get into the trap of ideology. I think a strong Catholic identity saves us from falling into ideology or making out of what we believe, what we think in scientific terms, a belief.
No, that's terrific. Let me pose an idea, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. This third dimension, which I described in that tension between the intellectual apostolate and the social justice apostolate, that gets interpreted in university contexts in that third pillar of service. You've mentioned that just a moment ago. You know, we've been wrestling with that here in our context at Georgetown. And in his mission statement for the Jesuits, St. Ignatius offers just a brief paragraph, but the paragraph ends with the words, "And we do this for the glory of God and the common good." And that idea of the common good is one that we've been trying to wrestle with. What are our responsibilities to the common good? Sometimes it requires deep service, going right into the community here in the city and providing immediate care for some of our citizens. Could be through our medical center or through our law clinics. It also can involve some of the deeper academic work we were just describing a moment ago regarding the structural challenges that we face. I remember some years back, you and I having a conversation when Pope Francis presented Evangelium Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. And ever since that conversation, I've wrestled with, those sections where he talks about the common good in society. It's more toward the end of the document, but he offers some challenging ideas that are somewhat cryptic in ways. And we've been trying to understand, how are those a challenge to us, a call to us to deepen our understanding of our responsibilities to the common good? How do you see the Holy Father offering us some insight into our wrestling with this question?
Yeah, I think the great contribution of him, and you mentioned that the Jesuit spirituality, and should make a little bit publicity here for Jesuits, but I know that there is so many other great charisms, especially in the United States, who have wonderful universities, and the better they serve their charisma, I think the better they serve also the society. But what you mentioned, I think one of his great ideas is that we should not separate things from each other. And therefore, it's the third mission is not just something additional. And it's also not just, okay, we teach our students, we have a good teaching, we have good research facilities, and we are also great in doing some social work. I think the strength of a real university begins, and I think this is also a very typical approach of our Holy Father, is that these three things have to go hand in hand, in the sense, service is a teaching experience, is a learning experience. But that means in your classroom, you have to teach your subject in a way that students probably are inspired to use what they learn to serve. And therefore, it's good probably to have with them experience what we call service learning. So that they and I've seen this now. I make publicity for another university, but I was very much impressed when I visited once Villanova University, who is also the best of our basketball teams. But when I saw there at the law school how the students there on one hand studied St. Augustine to have this kind of inspiration and to put it in a broader framework. But then the same students went out and defended at court the immigrants who could not even speak English well. And they provided for them not only translation from Spanish to English, but helped them also in getting through their cases. And then coming back with this experience, they had a total different attitude and approach towards learning law. And this is for me a wonderful example where you see all the three elements: research, teaching, service, and this within the Catholic framework and identity. And I think every university, I made the example here of Villanova, which is the Augustinian tradition. And you mentioned the Jesuit tradition. Well, we can say, okay, the Mercy Sisters have a great tradition from Catherine McAuley, and the Dominicans have a wonderful tradition in engaging in critical thinking with the most modern ideas of their, and now looking what's going in the urban context and all these, and try coming from your inspiration, coming from your Catholic identity, and try in this hermeneutic way to bring the three missions of the university together. And then I think we will outperform any other university, even the Ivory Leagues, because people will then in the end say, okay, it is not enough to have the best teachers, Nobel Prize winners. It is not enough to have the best research facilities and most money, the highest budget which you can have for this. But they will say there is something missing. And they will find this in our best Catholic universities, in the little community college as well as in Georgetown or Notre Dame or in another big university.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to open it up to Q&A in just a moment, and I'll be looking into our chat box to find the questions that folks may have. Before I do, let me ask you one last question in our conversation, and then we can engage with our colleagues. But there are a number of documents now over these last 8 years that the Holy Father has shared with us. And I mentioned some of the inspiration that we can take away from Joy of the Gospel or Laudato Si. There's one document that we haven't paid as much attention to in American higher education, and that's the document Veritatis Gaudium. Now, this was addressed to ecclesiastical universities and faculties, and so there might be a good reason why the folks who would be participating today may not have focused specific attention to it. But let me ask you, are there things that we could learn, draw from, be inspired by, reflect upon? Are there things in that document we should pay attention to?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. Thank you, Jack. And I have to remind you, you have a pontifical charter from 1833. So you are, in a certain sense, also bound to follow these documents. The others not, but you have to. But what I would recommend in reading this document, forget about the norms. The norms are not for Catholic universities, they're for ecclesiastical universities and faculties. That's those who teach theology, philosophy, canon law, and so on. But there is a foreword, which is also a text which is very strongly influenced from Evangelii Gaudium, and where you see the big principles, and they are valid to every higher education institution. I think they would be even interesting to put into practice also in non-Catholic institutions, but we see it also as our own strength, our part of our Catholic identity. And I just mentioned some of the principles. There's 4 major principles where he says we have to contribute with them if we really want to change the society, and to change the society, we have to undergo a cultural revolution, he's saying. It's a strong word for those who have still experienced somehow what was the cultural revolution in history. But he wants us to be radical. But how can we be radical? And that means, first, he says, we have to go back to the kerygma. That means go back to the fresh air of the gospel. Be inspired, and by very, as it is, not just filtering it down to what to our best dogmas, but say, let us be inspired by the kerygma, by the message Jesus brought. And this is all what you have already also mentioned, we can put into this. And then there's 3 more technical or practical principles. One is that dialogue must be not only a strategy, but must be the way of teaching and learning. And you can imagine what you can bring into this. The second one is that we have to overcome the separation in different subject areas and disciplines, but we have to work in a transdisciplinary way, which means that these disciplines interact. Today's problems cannot be resolved just within one department. You need the dialogue among the departments. And this brings us to the last principle which he mentions. And this is, we cannot do our mission if we are not networking. And this would be, and this is a new style, because it is, networking means also that there cannot be one to control everybody, but there must be the responsibility shared among all. And then you have the knots, the central points, which are interconnected with each other. And this is like ACCU. Therefore I like to be with you, because I think it's exactly networking.
Well, this is a perfect framing for the first question that has been posed to us. Let me frame it for you. The question comes from one of our colleagues. Please speak to the conversation between modern science and Catholic teaching in our institutions. And the dash is dialogue versus unidirectional. How do we understand the nature of the dialogue between science and faith? And I think you just outlined a little bit of a framework for us to engage those questions, but let me turn it to you.
Yeah, we mentioned before that is part of also of the thinking of Pope Francis is to appreciate differences. And you can interpret this in very different ways and find your own ideas in it again. But I think appreciating difference means also to understand that there is different missions of different persons and different institutions in the church. And I think a lot of conflicts begin where we don't realize that we have to leave enough space for the difference. And this is true for the scientific approach is not exactly the same like a doctrinal approach, but both are necessary and both are complementary. But the dogmatic approach, the church's doctrine, would not have to interfere in what is the area of scientific research, and has to be well informed by scientific research. But scientific research must also admits that there is limits, which is typical because not everything what I know, what I can use how I want. Otherwise, there is no community. So the ethical dimension, but you can also bring in other transcendental dimensions, like what is beautiful, what creates communion. So I think if we respect these differences, then we can have a fruitful dialogue. And let me say at this point, and I think this is something where we always struggle, and we had a lot of discussion about this in the past with you and other presidents of universities. I think a lot of misunderstandings come because Catholic universities do not understand what the role of the bishop is, and the bishop does not understand what the role of the university is. If they would realize that this is a very different role and very complementary, then the bishop would not like the university to be like his major seminary or a prayer club. Prayer is important, but it is not only the question of quality of a Catholic university is not just a question of how many chapels do you have on campus and how many hours do you pray. But on the other hand, a good Catholic university will have, for its own interest, a lot of hours of prayer on the campus. And on the other hand, the university must understand that the bishop is not just like the other teacher in the university with whom I can engage in a certain way and who just uses only scientific methods to discuss with me. So I think reflecting a bit on this legitimate and necessary difference helps us to be stronger in dialogue, be it between faith and reason, but being also between a bishop and the university president.
And how about theology and science? Theology and dialogue with science?
Definitely. And that's also why Corde asked that at all Catholic universities there should be at least a chair, or even better, an institute for theology. But they should not then be just something separate, but they must listen to their colleagues of the other faculties, and hopefully the other colleagues of the faculties would listen to them and they could engage in dialogue.
One question that's emerged, and I'll try to frame it consistent with our conversation. In some ways, Corde can look like a series of prescriptions, a checklist that we need to ensure we're honoring. And yet, as you've shared and as I've experienced, it can be a source of great inspiration. Do you have some thoughts regarding how we can ensure that we can capture this balance, especially ensuring that element of inspiration, of aspiration, of what it means for us to be authentic as Catholic universities, how we can ensure a reading of the document consistent with that goal?
I come back now also to a good experience which we shared together. I remember when I started at the congregation, there was a lot of problems where people told us that Georgetown is not fulfilling certain rules of the church. And you can imagine this is when we come to commencement speakers, when we come of certain activities of students on the campus, and it's always the same issues. And we could have addressed these issues and think a more sophisticated catalog of norms of the church ruling every situation, whom a president can choose for a commencement speaker, or how we have to deal with certain activities on the campus. But I think the first step was that we came to know each other, like I came to know also a lot of other university presidents, those coming to Rome for the ACCU Rome seminar, which I can recommend to everybody, because this is the places where you establish this kind of dialogue. And if you have this mutual trust, then I think you and other university presidents would not immediately understand what we are saying as a norm. And we would learn to listen more carefully to you before we come to tell you that you are not fulfilling a norm. And I come just to one of the hottest issues of Ex Corde Ecclesiae. in the discussion, I think if I look in our archives, the hottest discussion on Ex Corde was the discussion on the mandatum. But the norms of Ex Corde do not say this so clearly. So what they say is that everybody who is speaking of the church has a mandatum. But it could be a rule, this can be a law, but this can be also a more general affirmation. That means you, Jack DeGioia, work for the mission of the church. You are not speaking as somebody. In the moment as you're speaking as president of Georgetown University, you are speaking for the church. And that means you have a mandatum. The church, in the moments that you had been elected and approved as president of Georgetown, you got a mandatum. You were empowered to speak on behalf of one of our best Catholic universities. And that means also mandatum. So mandatum is not only a rule, a law, but it can be also an inspiring principle that you say, okay, and I engage, if I'm speaking with a Chinese government official, I'm probably the only voice of the church to whom he would listen. And I can add 10 other examples where people probably would rather listen to a university president than to me.
Now, one of the characteristics of the Catholic University, and this has been captured in lots of different statements. It's St. John Paul II in Fides et Ratio. In the 1930s, Father Eric Prizwara described the university as the place where the church meets the world and the world meets the church. It's the place where the values of the Gospels meet the culture. And one of our questions raises the idea of the Catholic University as being countercultural. Can we be countercultural while adopting an approach based on dialogue? How do you see that engagement of the Catholic University with the larger culture in which it is situated?
Yeah, I check. The better we know us and the longer we know us, we were able to I think we were able to discuss even with more diverse opinions. And I think this is an experience we all may on the human level. If you appreciate a person in his or her dignity, and you accept him or her at the level where you would put yourself or even higher, then you are open also to engage in a very, very strong dialogue in which opinions are very diverse. And I think this is something which we as church have to learn to distinguish these different areas. One is the area of the human relationship, of the appreciation of another person, and the other thing, it doesn't take anything away from these two if I say, sorry, but what you tell me, I cannot follow, or I'm totally opposed to this. And look, I explain why I'm. And I think this is the strength of a university. If we go to this famous passage of John Henry Newman, where he says, in the discussion of a university, every mind finds his counterpart and can therefore grow, because you grow if you are challenged. And this is what you try, and I think all of our Catholic universities would try with the young generation. It is not just when they come in and we say, okay, all what you believe, all what you do, all what you know is wonderful. No, I have to say, look, what you believe, have you thought about this? And I provoke you now with a very strong opinion, which is totally against what you believe. But there is growth. Sure. And I think this is the way how we have to do it in a fraternal relationship.
Your recalling of St. John Henry Newman's The Idea of the University is a segue to the next question that was raised. So you've anticipated it. And the question is, how would you compare and contrast Ex Corde with the idea of the university? Do you see connections, distinctions? I'd be interested in you sharing your reflections on on the two documents?
I could be very, very bad with regard to Newman and say the difference is, I think, whatever we say, but Corde was pretty successful also in helping Catholic universities to develop. Cardinal Newman totally failed when he tried to develop a Catholic university. But some people say it was the problem of the Irish at that time, or it was the problem of the different understanding between an Englishman and the Irish, or whatever. No, but this is just for making a little joke. I think there's a lot of coherence between the two documents, and obviously you are all capable of administering a Catholic university. The idea of the University of Newman, these are principles which have to be brought down to earth, to the situation by a good president. So I think the idea of the university should be read by a good president who then says, okay, this is wonderful ideas, but I now work with my staff to bring them into reality. And there, I think there is a bit discrepancy, because the idea of a university, sometimes it's wonderful ideas, but it is an issue to bring them into life. But again, I trust in you, and I would recommend to read it and then translate it into your university.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of teaching the book in seminar for many years. And I think your opening comment was right on target. He had a very different kind of purpose and audience in mind for the idea of the university. He was speaking to the benefactors of the first Catholic university in Ireland. And as you said, it was not a great success story, but what he left behind for all of us was a resource of incalculable worth. We have time for one last question. And I'll read it exactly as it has been shared with me, and I'll be very interested in your thoughts on this. The person said, "I very much appreciate your perspective and positive dialogical presentation. I'm wondering, what do you or the congregation consider the most pressing issues facing Catholic higher education over the next 20 years?"
There is so many that it's difficult to find one. But I would say not going against something, but going ahead and going beyond. I hope you can make something out of this. We are too often in situations so much taken by a single problem, and we lose the long-term vision. And therefore, some excellent Catholic universities have a small problem, a rather small problem with their bishop, and they say, okay, nothing to do, we give up our connection to the church. Or on the other hand, the same reaction from a bishop. And there we see a very narrow perspective, and we lose the great inspiration. And I think this is probably what I take also from this session and from your words. You need this great vision to be able to go beyond and not lose the faith and the hope in that what we are doing is not just our work, but it is also God's work. It is inspired work where we can, if we are faithful to this mission and to this vision, then we can change something of the world, I believe.
I cannot imagine a better way to bring closure to this conversation than with those words. So I can't begin to express my appreciation. For those who don't know, you are in Rome right now. You're working a little late tonight in order to be here with us, and we could not be more honored to be able to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you all, and I hope at least to see, if not all, but some of you at the next edition of the Rome seminar. Take care. Thank you.
You too. Wish you the very best.